Hi everybody, welcome to our Wednesday Bible study. Tonight we begin a brand new book. We're going to talk about the book of James. And tonight we're going to do an introduction to this book. Now, as a way of introduction, Martin Luther in 1522, in his introduction, in his first edition of his German New Testament, he said the following about the book of James. In fine, St. John's Gospel and his first epistle, St. Paul's epistles, especially those to the Romans, Galatians, Ephesians, and St. Peter's first epistle, these are the books which show thee Christ, and teach thee everything that is needful and blessed for thee to know, even though thou never see or hear any other book or doctrine. Therefore is St. James' epistle a right strawy epistle in comparison with them, for it has no gospel character to it. Martin Luther said that. So many use this quote and say that this book should be questioned. But notice what Martin Luther is not saying. He's not questioning the inspiration of the book of James. He's just saying this book is very, very different from any other book in the New Testament. And if you read it, you'll get that sense. Now, James was one of the last books that was added to the canon of the New Testament because of its brevity. It was addressed specifically to Jewish Christians, its lack of deep doctrinal content, and because it was not written by Paul or one of the other apostles. The book of James, however, is a deeply practical book on how to live out the great doctrinal teachings of the New Testament. James assumes that right doctrine should result in right living. Let me say that again. Right doctrine should result in right living. Many theologians have called the book of James the New Testament book of Proverbs for his strong statements on right living. But it appears that James was deeply impacted by the Sermon on the Mount. Many have noted many references and allusions to it. I'm sure we'll put these on the screen. I'm not going to go through them all, but there are huge parallels between James's words and the Sermon on the Mount. If you take a chance to look at those. Now, let's talk about the authorship. Now, of all the men named James in the New Testament, only 2 men seem to be prominent enough to write this letter. James, the son of Zebedee and brother of John. But his early martyrdom in Acts chapter 12, verse 2, eliminates him from being a possibility of writer of this book. And then the second person is James, the half-brother of Jesus. James and the rest of his brothers rejected Jesus initially. We see that in John chapter 7, verse 5. But later, he came to believe in Jesus, that Jesus was the Messiah of Israel, and he became to be head of the church in Jerusalem. We see that in Acts chapter 12, verse 17, and Galatians 2:9, until he was martyred around 62 AD. Now there are strong parallels in speech in James and in James' speech in Acts 15. The Greek infinitive verb greetings only appears in James 1:1 and Acts 15:23, except for its use in Romans by Claudius Lysias in Acts 23:26. And other parallels include the use of the following words that are consistent in James and the book of Acts. Beloved, it's used in James 1:16, 1:19, chapter 2, verse 5, and in Acts 15:25. Your souls, it's used in James 1:21 and Acts of 15:24. Visit, it's used in James chapter 1, verse 27, and it is the same Greek verb translated as concerned himself about in Acts 15, verse 14. And turn, it's used in James 5, verses 19 through 20, and Acts 15, verse 19. So, we see a lot of parallel back to the book of Acts. Now, the authorship, the Jewish nature of the book is consistent with the picture of James in Acts 15 and in Acts 21. The book of James contains 4 direct quotes from the Old Testament and more than 40 Old Testament allusions. He refers to the 12 tribes spread across the world in James 1. He calls the gospel the law of liberty in James 2:12. And he mentions the meeting place of his readers as a synagogue in James 2:2. In James 4 verse 4, he uses Old Testament practice of using the figure of adultery to describe spiritual defection. And in James chapter 5 verse 12, he condemns the common Jewish practice of abusing oaths. And he uses Old Testament figure repeatedly. Elijah is used in James 5 verses 17 through 18. Abraham is used in James 2:21. Rahab is used in James 2:25. Job is used in James chapter 5 verse 11. And he is the only author that refers to God by his Old Testament name, Lord of Sabaoth, other than Paul, who quotes Isaiah in Romans 9:29. Now, despite the evidence, many reject James as the author because they claim that the simple Greek peasant could not write in such polished Greek. The Greek in the book of James is very, very good. But we must remember this. James grew up in Greek-speaking Galilee, and Greek was the everyday language of business. And as a head of the Jerusalem church, he would have had much need to know Greek and be fluent in it due to the many Greek-speaking Jews in the church. It would have been essential for him to know Greek. And then they claim that he would not have made more of the fact that he was Jesus' brother. They think he would have tooted that horn a lot. But this may be because he was well known and because they knew he was Jesus' brother. There was no need for him to do that. And then they claim that James doesn't talk about great theological doctrine, which should be expected by the brother of Jesus. You know, you think about that, and that's crazy. As stated earlier, James may have assumed their knowledge of these truths and wanted to point out that right doctrine must result in right living. And the claim that the reference to persecution in the letter points to an authorship later than James was alive. But there's no evidence whatsoever that persecution was at hand of the government. There's no evidence we have that at all in these writings. It may have been from others in the society, in fact. Now, the date and the place of writing, the absence of any reference to the Jerusalem Council in Act 15 that happened around AD 49 points to a date earlier than this council. The lack of any reference to Gentile Christians or Gentile churches or Gentile-related issues in the church supports this view. Therefore, this book was probably written between 44 and 49 AD, making it one of the earliest books written in the New Testament. The place of writing was undoubtedly Jerusalem, the home base of James. Now, the purpose of the book is to challenge his readers to assess the authenticity of their faith. The book is structured around a series of tests. First, he begins with an introduction in chapter 1, verse 1. Then perseverance in suffering in verses 2 through 12. And then temptation in verses 13 through 18. And then our response to the word in verses 19 through 27. And then in chapter 2, he's going to talk about impartial love in verses 1 through 13. And then righteous works in verses 14 through 26. And then in chapter 3, he's going to pick up his discussion about the tongue and the need to control the tongue in verses 1 through 12. And then in verses 13 through 18, he's going to talk about wisdom. And then in chapter 4, in the first 12 verses, he's going to talk about worldly indulgences. And then verses 13 through 17 in chapter 4, he's going to talk about dependence. And then in chapter 5, he's going to pick up the issue of patient endurance in verses 1 through 11. And then he's going to talk about truthfulness in verse 12 of chapter 5. And then verse 13 through 18, he's going to talk about prayerfulness. And then he'll wrap it up with, in verses 19 through 20, about a discussion of true faith. So this is going to be a book that is going to challenge us greatly, for it's going to make sure that what we believe is what we live. And it's a great book to look at as a church. Now let me ask 3 questions of you tonight for your consideration. First, I want you to read the book of James every day this week. What do you see and learn from him as you read? It's a short book, so it should be a quick read for you. And then number 2, why is it so good to test our faith? What do we learn about our faith as we go through the test and the review? Why should we be doing that as Christians? And then number 3, as you assess your faith in light of James' words, where are you doing well? All of us have certain things that we do really well. And how will you keep your faith strong in these areas? But then the other side of the coin is this. Where do we need some work, and what are we going to do to start to help build up our faith in those areas? So I hope you get ready for this great book, and I hope you've enjoyed this study tonight. And I hope we'll see you on Saturday night at our worship service. We meet at Victory Life Church, located at 155 Northwest 112th Avenue in Plantation, Florida. It's a wonderful place, full of wonderful people. You'll enjoy it. It'll be a great time, and I hope you have a blessed week as you read the book of James this week. Amen.